The synthetic coffee tasted like it had been filtered through a quantum relay, which was fitting since Lieutenant Thomas Harper had spent the last 3 days elbow-deep in quantum relay maintenance, and everything in his life now tasted vaguely metallic. He sat alone on the observation deck of ceasefire station Omega-7, watching distant stars wheel slowly past the reinforced viewports while trying to convince himself that the persistent humming in his skull was just fatigue and not a sign that the station's communication array was finally achieving consciousness. "Third cup tonight," he muttered to himself, holding up the disposable container that bore the optimistic label Premium Earth Blend, despite containing what was clearly reconstituted protein paste with caffeine additives. "At this rate, I'm going to need quantum surgery to replace my nervous system." The station around him thrummed with the kind of tense energy that came from housing two civilizations that had spent the better part of a century trying to annihilate each other. Somewhere in the diplomatic sections, human and Velthari negotiators were probably arguing about trade route classifications and mineral extraction rights with the passion of people who understood that getting the details wrong could restart a war. Thomas, meanwhile, was responsible for making sure their heated discussions didn't crash the communication systems that kept them talking instead of shooting. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was important work. Or at least that's what he told himself when he was crawling through maintenance shafts at 3 in the morning, replacing burnt-out neural interface nodes, while diplomats argued about the philosophical implications of tariff schedules. His personal comm chirped with another diagnostic report from the primary communication array. The quantum entanglement matrix was showing stress patterns that suggested it was trying to process more encrypted data than its specifications allowed, which shouldn't be possible given the theoretical limits of quantum information transfer. Thomas had filed 7 different reports about the anomaly, and each time his superiors had assured him that everything was operating within normal parameters. "Normal parameters," he said to his coffee, which didn't argue back. "Right, because quantum arrays always develop mysterious harmonic frequencies that make technicians feel like their heads are full of bees." The observation deck was supposed to be empty during night cycle, which made it the perfect place to drink questionable coffee and contemplate the absurdity of his assignment. Thomas Harper, communications technician 3rd class, responsible for maintaining the technological infrastructure that prevented interstellar war. His mother would be so proud if she had any idea what he actually did for a living instead of the routine maintenance work he described in his letters home. A soft footstep echoed from the corridor behind him, barely audible over the station's ambient hum. Thomas didn't turn around immediately. Night shift insomnia was common among diplomatic personnel, and he'd encountered several bleary-eyed ambassadors wandering the corridors during his off-duty hours. But something about the sound made him pause, coffee cup halfway to his lips. The footstep had been too controlled, too precise. Most people walking through empty corridors made unconscious noise, scuffed shoes, rustling clothing, the small sounds of casual movement. This had sounded like someone who was trying to move quietly and succeeding almost perfectly. Thomas turned around. The woman approaching him moved with the kind of predatory grace that suggested extensive training in violence. Her ears were pointed in the distinctive Velthari style, and her dark hair was woven with threads that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Intricate tattoos covered her visible skin, shifting colors in patterns that probably meant something significant to anyone fluent in Velthari cultural symbology. She wore clothing that managed to look both elegantly formal and tactically practical, and the curved blade in her right hand caught the starlight streaming through the viewports. "Thomas Harper," she said, her voice carrying the musical undertones that marked native Velthari speakers. "You have been marked for termination." Thomas blinked. Then he looked down at his coffee cup, as if it might contain answers to questions like, "Why is an alien assassin trying to kill me? And what exactly did I do to deserve this?" "I'm sorry," he said finally, because his mother had raised him to be polite even in extraordinary circumstances. I think there might be some mistake. I'm just a communications technician. I maintain quantum relays and file maintenance reports. The most dangerous thing I do is occasionally reset neural interface nodes without proper safety protocols. The assassin continued approaching with that same fluid grace, her bioluminescent tattoos pulsing in rhythms that seemed to match his heartbeat. There is no mistake, Thomas Harper. You have been designated for elimination by authorities whose names I am not permitted to speak. Authorities. Thomas set his coffee cup down carefully, noting that his hands were surprisingly steady given the circumstances. What authorities? The only authority I answer to is Chief Petty Officer Martinez, and she mostly just wants me to stop filing reports about the quantum array anomalies. The anomalies, the assassin repeated, and Thomas thought he detected something like surprise in her voice. You are aware of the communication irregularities. Aware of them. I've been documenting them for 3 days. The primary array has been processing encrypted data streams that shouldn't exist according to the technical specifications. Thomas realized he was explaining quantum communication theory to someone who was presumably planning to kill him, but stress made him talkative. The harmonic frequencies are completely outside normal parameters, and they're creating resonance patterns that interfere with standard neural interfaces. I keep filing reports, but nobody seems concerned about potential system failures during crucial diplomatic negotiations. The assassin had stopped moving. Her blade remained raised, but her posture had shifted slightly, and her tattoos were cycling through what looked like rapid calculation patterns. You have documented the anomalies, she said, and it wasn't quite a question. Extensively, with detailed technical analysis and recommendations for system optimization. Thomas paused. Is that why someone wants me dead? Because I've been doing my job too thoroughly. The woman's pointed ears twitched, and Thomas realized she was probably receiving information through some kind of neural link that he couldn't detect. Her expression had become unreadable, but the bioluminescent patterns on her skin were shifting faster now, creating complex geometries that hurt to look at directly. This complicates matters significantly, she said finally. Good complicated or bad complicated? Thomas asked. Because from my perspective, complications that delay assassination attempts are generally positive developments. Zareth Midnightborn had been engineered for precision. Her nervous system had been modified to process target identification faster than conscious thought. Her reflexes enhanced to eliminate threats before they could respond, and her sensory organs calibrated to detect deception through micro-expressions and biochemical changes that most beings couldn't consciously control. 15 years of training had taught her to kill cleanly, efficiently, and without hesitation. None of that preparation had covered what to do when your target started explaining quantum communication theory while looking genuinely puzzled about why someone might want him dead. Her biosensors continued their automatic analysis of Thomas Harper's vital signs, confirming his identity through biometric markers that had been uploaded directly into her enhanced memory centers. Height, weight, genetic markers, even the scar on his left hand from a childhood accident involving a malfunctioning food processor. Everything matched the termination order perfectly. But the harmonic analysis of his cardiovascular rhythms was returning readings that shouldn't be possible. The frequency patterns, she said, interrupting his increasingly technical explanation of quantum relay maintenance protocols. In your heartbeat, they match classification codes that exist only in secured government archives. Thomas blinked. My heartbeat has classification codes. Treaty key frequencies, Zareth continued, her tactical analysis systems running probability calculations faster than she could consciously follow. Biometric signatures embedded in communication protocols to prevent unauthorized access to diplomatic channels. Your cardiac rhythms are generating harmonic patterns that correspond to the most sensitive peace negotiation data. That's... Thomas paused, clearly trying to process information that was well outside his technical training. That's not medically possible. Hearts don't just accidentally encrypt themselves with government security codes. Accidental encryption is not the concern. Zareth's weapon remained raised, but her tactical protocols were generating warning flags that made her enhanced nervous system feel like it was caught in an electrical storm. The treaty key frequencies are protected by reprisal cascade provisions. Any attempt to terminate a carrier will trigger automatic war declarations from both governments. War declarations. Thomas's voice cracked slightly. For killing a communications technician. For killing a living encryption key whose death would be interpreted as an act of sabotage against the peace process. Zareth's tattoos were cycling through rapid analysis patterns as she accessed classified databases through her neural link. The reprisal cascade system was designed to protect crucial diplomatic assets by making their elimination prohibitively expensive in political terms. Thomas sat down heavily in his chair, staring at her with the expression of someone whose understanding of his own life had just been fundamentally restructured. So you can't kill me because it would start a war, but someone sent you to kill me anyway. Someone sent me to kill you precisely because it would start a war. The implications were crystallizing in Zareth's enhanced cognitive centers with the clarity of a perfect weapon strike. Your termination would trigger the cascade, blame would be assigned to whichever government appeared responsible, and the resulting conflict would provide cover for activities that benefit from chaos. What kind of activities? Zareth accessed her mission briefing files, cross-referencing them with the new intelligence her analysis had generated. Arms trafficking, resource smuggling, the kind of profitable ventures that thrive when legitimate governments are too busy fighting each other to monitor commercial traffic properly. Thomas picked up his coffee cup, realized it was empty, and set it down again. So I'm supposed to die not because of anything I've done, but because my death would be politically convenient for weapons smugglers. That is an accurate summary of your situation. And you're supposed to kill me even though it would start an interstellar war. I was supposed to kill you because it would start an interstellar war. Zareth lowered her blade slightly, though her combat reflexes kept her ready to react to any sudden movements. However, my programming includes priority directives that supersede individual termination orders when broader strategic considerations are involved. Meaning that starting unnecessary wars is generally considered counterproductive to the overall mission of maintaining galactic stability. Zareth's tactical analysis systems were generating solution matrices faster than her conscious mind could evaluate them, which creates a logical paradox in my mission parameters. Thomas studied her with the careful attention of someone trying to determine whether his potential killer was having a rational conversation or a psychotic break. What happens when an assassin encounters a logical paradox? Typically, mission abort and extraction. Zareth accessed her emergency protocols, noting that standard procedure would be to withdraw and report the complication to her handlers for reassessment. However, withdrawal would leave you vulnerable to other elimination attempts, and your death by any means would still trigger the reprisal cascade. So we're both stuck. Temporarily. Zareth's enhanced cognitive systems were processing contingency plans at quantum speeds, evaluating scenarios that ranged from complex to absurd. Unless we can identify and eliminate the source of the termination order before alternative assassins are deployed. Other assassins. Thomas's voice had gone up an octave. How many people are trying to kill me? Standard protocols suggest a minimum of 3 independent teams to ensure redundancy in case of primary mission failure. Zareth's biosensors detected Thomas's increasing stress through elevated heart rate and biochemical changes that made his treaty key frequencies even more pronounced. though given the political implications of this particular assignment, the number could be significantly higher. Thomas buried his face in his hands. This morning I was worried about quantum relay maintenance schedules. Now I'm apparently a walking encryption key being hunted by multiple alien assassination teams, so that someone can profit from an interstellar war that would kill millions of people. Billions, actually. Modern warfare scales quite efficiently. That's not helping. Zareth found herself experiencing something that her emotional regulation systems couldn't quite classify. A response that seemed related to what unmodified beings called sympathy. Thomas Harper was clearly an innocent caught in circumstances beyond his understanding or control, and her training had never covered situations where the target was both legitimate and completely undeserving of termination. "There is a potential solution," she said finally. Thomas looked up hopefully. "Please tell me it doesn't involve more people trying to kill me." "It involves fewer people trying to kill you, but significantly more legal complications." Zareth accessed her cultural database, cross-referencing Velthari protection protocols with current diplomatic law. "I can invoke witness consort provisions under traditional Velthari legal codes." "That sounds ominous." "It would temporarily bind us under mutual protection laws, making any attempt on your life equivalent to attacking a diplomatic witness under my authority." Zareth's tattoos shifted to formal legal patterns as she explained the implications. "The protection would last until we can expose the conspiracy behind your termination order. And the complications? We would be legally considered partners until the threat is resolved." Zareth's enhanced social analysis systems suggested that Thomas's cultural background might make this arrangement psychologically difficult. The bond creates certain, intimate obligations under Velthari law. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Define intimate obligations." "We would need to remain in close physical proximity, share sleeping quarters, and coordinate all activities through mutual consultation." Zareth's tactical protocols indicated that full disclosure was strategically advisable. "Also, if we fail to resolve the situation within one solar day, the bond becomes permanent." "Permanent, as in for life?" Thomas stared at her for several seconds, then started laughing with the kind of hysteria that suggested his stress management systems were approaching critical failure. "So my choices are: get killed by multiple assassination teams, start an interstellar war, or enter into a potentially lifelong legal partnership with someone whose name I don't even know." "Zareth Midnightborn," she said. "And those are essentially your options, yes?" Thomas woke up with the distinct sensation that someone had replaced his nervous system with live electrical cables while he was unconscious. His limbs felt heavy and disconnected. His mouth tasted like he'd been gargling with recycling plant runoff, and there was an uncomfortable tightness around his wrists that suggested restraints of some kind. "Paralytic agents metabolize differently in human biochemistry than my briefing materials indicated," said a familiar voice from somewhere to his left. "I may have miscalculated the dosage." Thomas opened his eyes to find himself zip-tied to a chair in what appeared to be a storage facility for diplomatic gifts. Elaborate sculptures, ceremonial weapons, and various artistic tributes to interstellar friendship were stacked around him in careful arrangements that suggested someone had been using the space for extended occupation. Zareth sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, her bioluminescent tattoos cycling through patterns that looked like complex mathematical calculations. "You drugged me," Thomas said, testing the strength of his restraints and finding them disappointingly secure. "I faked your death," Zareth corrected. "The paralytic was necessary to simulate cardiac arrest convincingly enough to fool station medical sensors. Your vital signs appeared to flatline for approximately 4 minutes and 37 seconds. 4.5 minutes. Thomas tried to process this information while his drug-addled brain slowly resumed normal function. That seems like a long time to be fake dead. Long enough for security teams to respond and document your apparent demise, creating official records that should discourage additional assassination attempts. Zareth's expression was unreadable, but her tattoos had shifted to what looked like protective patterns. I transported you here during the medical emergency response, while station personnel were focused on resuscitation protocols. Thomas looked around the storage facility, noting the sophisticated electronic equipment scattered between the diplomatic gifts. Where exactly is here? Secured Storage Section 7, Sublevel 12. This area is shielded against electronic surveillance and rarely accessed except during major diplomatic ceremonies. Zareth gestured at the equipment surrounding them. I have established a temporary operations center using diplomatic communication arrays that cannot be monitored by either government's intelligence networks. The operations center for what? Investigating the conspiracy that led to your termination order. Zareth stood with fluid grace, moving to one of the communication arrays. Your fake death provides us with a window of opportunity, but it will not last long. Alternative assassination teams will be deployed once your handlers realize that the paralytic scenario was artificially induced. Thomas tested his restraints again. Any particular reason I'm tied to a chair during this investigation? Velthari witness consort protocols require that the protected individual remain under direct supervision until the threat is neutralized. Zareth's fingers danced across the holographic interface, calling up streams of encrypted data. Also, the paralytic agents may cause temporary disorientation and impaired judgment. Restraints are a safety precaution. Safety precaution against what? Against you wandering into station corridors while legally dead and causing a diplomatic incident that could destabilize the entire peace process. Thomas considered that's actually a reasonable precaution. I am trained to be thorough. Zareth accessed another data stream, her tattoos pulsing in sync with the information flow. I have been analyzing your work assignments for the past 6 months, cross-referencing them with communication traffic patterns and diplomatic activity logs. Find anything interesting? Your routine maintenance work on the quantum relay systems has been significantly less routine than your supervisors indicated. The holographic display shifted to show complex network diagrams and data flow patterns. The communication arrays you service have been processing encrypted transmissions that do not appear in any official diplomatic logs. Thomas leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed, studying the patterns Zareth was highlighting. Those look like shipping manifests, but why would shipping data be routed through diplomatic communication channels? Because diplomatic channels are exempt from standard customs monitoring and commercial traffic analysis. Zareth's enhanced pattern recognition systems were processing the data faster than Thomas could follow consciously. Someone has been using the peace negotiation infrastructure to coordinate smuggling operations. Smuggling what? Advanced weaponry, military-grade technology, the kind of equipment that both human and Velthari governments have agreed not to export to contested territories. The display shifted to show shipping routes and cargo manifests. These transmissions contain coordination data for weapons shipments being delivered to extremist factions on both sides of the territorial boundaries. Thomas felt a cold sensation in his stomach that had nothing to do with the lingering effects of paralytic drugs. Someone's been arming both sides of the conflict. Someone's been preparing both sides for the resumption of hostilities. Zareth's tactical analysis systems were generating probability matrices that made her tattoos flicker like stroboscopic lighting. The weapons shipments are timed to arrive simultaneously with the collapse of peace negotiations, providing both governments with the military capacity to escalate quickly to full-scale warfare. And my maintenance work accidentally recorded evidence of this coordination. Your quantum relay diagnostics captured encrypted fragments every time you performed routine system maintenance. The harmonic frequencies in your cardiovascular system are not natural treaty key patterns. They are artifacts created by prolonged exposure to classified encryption algorithms. Zareth's expression had become grimly focused. Your body has become a living archive of evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy. Thomas stared at the data streaming across the displays, trying to comprehend the scale of what they were uncovering. So the assassination order wasn't just to trigger a war. It was to eliminate the evidence that could prove the war was artificially orchestrated. Correct, your death would serve multiple purposes: eliminating compromising evidence, triggering the reprisal cascade to restart hostilities, and providing perfect cover for the weapons shipments that are already en route to their destinations. How long do we have? Zareth accessed her mission chronometer, calculating timelines based on standard diplomatic procedures and logistics schedules. The weapons shipments will reach their targets within 18 hours. Once both sides are armed with enhanced military technology, preventing the escalation to full warfare becomes significantly more difficult. And if we expose the conspiracy, if we can provide evidence to both governments simultaneously, the peace negotiations can continue, and the weapons shipments can be intercepted before they reach extremist groups. Zareth's tattoos shifted to what looked like determined commitment patterns. However, the investigation will require accessing databases that are heavily monitored by the same individuals who orchestrated your assassination. Thomas tested his restraints one more time, then looked at Zareth with the expression of someone who had finally grasped the full scope of his situation. So we need to expose a conspiracy involving high-ranking officials from both governments, using evidence that only exists in my cardiovascular system, while avoiding detection by intelligence networks that are actively hunting for us. That is an accurate summary of our mission parameters, and we have less than 18 hours to accomplish this before multiple alien assassination teams realize I'm not actually dead. 17 hours and 23 minutes, accounting for time zone variations across the station. Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing the absurdity of his circumstances. You know, this morning I was worried about whether I'd filed the proper maintenance reports. Now I'm apparently the key witness in an interstellar conspiracy, while legally bound to someone whose job description includes professional killer. Zareth's tattoos flickered in what might have been amusement. If it helps, my job description also includes conflict resolution specialist. Does it really? No, I added that part for psychological comfort. Despite everything, Thomas found himself smiling. Well, I appreciate the effort. Now, any chance you could untie me so we can save the galaxy before breakfast? Dawn was approaching across Ceasefire Station, Omega-7's main viewport, when Thomas finally understood why quantum communication arrays had been giving him headaches. Sitting beside Zareth in their improvised operations center, watching her interface directly with the diplomatic networks through some kind of neural connection that made her tattoos pulse like a living constellation, he realized that his brain had been trying to process encryption algorithms that weren't designed for human comprehension. The treaty key frequencies aren't just in your cardiovascular system, Zareth explained, her pointed ears twitching as she navigated through layers of classified data that would have required weeks of paperwork for him to access through normal channels. They've been integrating with your neural pathways every time you performed maintenance on the quantum relays. Your entire nervous system has become a biological decryption matrix. That sounds medically terrifying, Thomas said, monitoring the security feeds while she worked. Are you telling me that routine maintenance work has been gradually turning my brain into a living computer? Not a computer, a key. The encryption algorithms have been using your neural activity to generate authentication codes for the most sensitive diplomatic communications. Zareth's fingers danced across the holographic interface, pulling up shipping manifests and communication logs with surgical precision, which means you can access data stream that would normally require authorization from both government intelligence services. Thomas watched the information flow across their displays, noting patterns that his enhanced pattern recognition was processing faster than his conscious mind could follow. The weapons shipments, they're not just going to extremist groups. Look at these delivery coordinates. Zareth paused her data mining to study the shipping routes Thomas had highlighted. Those are military installations, official government facilities on both sides of the territorial boundary. Someone's been shipping advanced weapons directly to both militaries, while simultaneously providing the same technology to extremist factions. The implications crystallized with the clarity of a perfectly maintained quantum array. They're not just trying to restart the war, they're trying to ensure that when it starts, it escalates faster and deadlier than any previous conflict. Maximum destruction in minimum time, generating maximum profit for military suppliers. Zareth's tactical analysis systems were processing the conspiracy's scope with visible strain, her tattoos cycling through patterns that seemed to indicate deep concentration mixed with growing anger. The peace negotiations were never intended to succeed. They were designed to provide cover for the largest illegal arms buildup in galactic history. Thomas accessed the communication logs, cross-referencing them with diplomatic schedules and personnel assignments. And everyone involved in the conspiracy is currently attending the peace talks. They're literally negotiating the ceasefire while simultaneously coordinating its failure. Which gives us a target-rich environment for evidence gathering, but also means we're surrounded by people who have ordered our termination. Zareth's enhanced hearing detected footsteps in the corridor outside their storage facility, and her posture shifted to combat readiness. Security patrol, standard sweep pattern, but they're moving slower than usual. Slower, as if they're looking for something specific. Zareth's weapon appeared in her hand with fluid grace that made the movement seem like natural physics. We may have triggered monitoring algorithms when we accessed the classified databases. Thomas felt his heart rate accelerate, which immediately made the treaty key frequencies in his cardiovascular system more pronounced. The quantum arrays throughout the station began resonating in sympathy, creating harmonic patterns that were probably visible on every security sensor in their section. My panic response is broadcasting our location, he realized. Breathe slowly. Focus on mathematical calculations or technical procedures, anything that generates calm, regular neural activity. Zareth was monitoring the security feeds while preparing defensive positions among the diplomatic gifts. We need to complete the data compilation before security forces locate us. Thomas forced himself to focus on quantum relay maintenance protocols, using the familiar technical procedures to regulate his breathing and heart rate. The harmonic frequencies gradually stabilized, though he could feel the encryption algorithms still processing in the background of his consciousness, like a quantum computer running calculations just below the threshold of awareness. I've isolated the primary communication nodes, Zareth reported, her neural interface pulsing with rapid data transfer. The conspiracy involves 12 high-ranking officials from both governments, 17 commercial shipping entities, and at least 36 separate weapons suppliers. The evidence includes financial records, shipping manifests, and communication logs spanning 8 months of coordination. Can we transmit it? Not through normal diplomatic channels. Too many of the conspirators have administrative access to communication networks. Zareth's tattoos shifted to what looked like creative problem-solving patterns. However, your treaty key frequencies give us access to emergency protocols that bypass normal command structures. Thomas understood immediately. Direct transmission to both heads of state simultaneously, using authentication codes that can't be blocked or intercepted by intermediate authorities. Exactly. though the transmission will require using your nervous system as a biological transmitter, which may be uncomfortable. Define uncomfortable. Imagine having your entire consciousness temporarily converted into a radio signal and broadcast across interstellar distances. Thomas considered this. Will I survive the experience? Probably. My briefing materials are somewhat vague on the long-term effects of using treaty key frequencies at full power. Somewhat vague. There are no previous cases of biological treaty key activation. You would be the first. The security footsteps had stopped directly outside their storage facility, and Thomas could hear the quiet sounds of personnel preparing to breach the door. His enhanced nervous system was processing the conspiracy evidence faster than conscious thought, compiling it into transmission formats that his pre-enhancement brain couldn't have imagined. "Do it," he said. Zareth's hands found his temples, and her neural interface connected with the treaty key frequencies that had been building in his consciousness for months. Thomas felt his awareness expand beyond the boundaries of his individual identity, as his nervous system became a conduit for 8 months of carefully compiled evidence, financial records flowing through his visual cortex, shipping manifests encoded in his motor functions, communication logs distributed across his memory centers. For approximately 37 seconds, Thomas Harper ceased to exist as an individual human consciousness, and became instead a living transmission containing everything needed to expose the greatest conspiracy in galactic history. His awareness stretched across light years as the evidence beamed simultaneously to Earth Command and the Velthari High Council, bypassing every security protocol and administrative barrier through authentication codes that existed in the quantum structure of his enhanced biology. When his individual consciousness reassembled itself, he was lying on the floor of the storage facility, while Zareth held his hand and security personnel stood in the doorway looking confused by readings that showed massive data transmissions from a location that appeared to contain nothing but diplomatic gifts and a legally dead communications technician. "Status," Thomas whispered. "Evidence delivered. Conspiracy exposed. War prevented." Zareth's tattoos were cycling through what looked like profound relief patterns. "Also, congratulations on surviving the first successful biological treaty key transmission in recorded history." "How do I feel?" "Different. The treaty key frequencies have permanently integrated with your neural architecture. You're no longer just a communications technician. You're a living diplomatic asset with unprecedented access to interstellar communication networks." Thomas sat up slowly, noting that the headaches that had plagued him for days were completely gone. Instead, he felt connected to the station's communication arrays in a way that seemed natural rather than intrusive. And the witness-consort bond, technically fulfilled. We exposed the threat and neutralized the conspiracy within the required time frame. Zareth helped him to his feet, her expression carefully neutral. The legal bond dissolves automatically upon successful completion of protective objectives. Automatically, unless both parties agree to maintain it voluntarily. The security personnel were still standing in the doorway, apparently receiving updated orders through their communication systems. One of them stepped forward with the expression of someone delivering information they didn't quite understand. "Lieutenant Commander Harper, you're wanted in the diplomatic section. Immediate priority, something about emergency testimony regarding." The security officer paused, consulting his datapad. "Interstellar arms trafficking and conspiracy to incite warfare." Thomas looked at Zareth, who was studying him with those violet eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. "I suppose this means I'll be testifying before both governments about how I accidentally became a biological encryption key. Among other things." Her tattoos flickered in patterns he was beginning to recognize as subtle amusement. "Though I suspect your career in routine maintenance work may be concluding. What happens to professional assassins whose missions end in preventing wars instead of enabling them?" That depends entirely on whether they choose to pursue new career opportunities. Zareth's expression became carefully diplomatic. I understand that the Interstellar Communication Authority is seeking personnel with unique qualifications for monitoring diplomatic networks. Thomas felt something warm and electric that had nothing to do with treaty key frequencies or enhanced neural pathways. Unique qualifications like accidentally preventing interstellar conspiracies and compatibility with Velthari legal protocols. The witness-consort bond may be technically dissolved, but the working relationship appears to have been effective. The security officer cleared his throat politely. Sir, the diplomatic section is waiting. Right, emergency testimony about accidentally saving the galaxy. Thomas started toward the door, then paused. Zareth, after I finish explaining to two governments how quantum relay maintenance work became interstellar espionage, would you be interested in dinner? Somewhere with comfortable chairs and food that doesn't taste like recycled protein paste. Her smile made her bioluminescent tattoos pulse with patterns that looked remarkably like joy. I believe that can be arranged. Though I should warn you that Velthari dining customs involve certain ceremonial requirements. More complicated than faking death and exposing galactic conspiracies. Significantly less complicated, but potentially more personally meaningful. Thomas considered this as they walked toward the diplomatic sections, surrounded by security personnel who were still trying to understand how a routine maintenance technician had become central to the most important intelligence breakthrough in recent galactic history. You know, he said, 6 months ago, the most exciting thing in my life was successfully calibrating quantum entanglement matrices. Now I'm a biological diplomatic asset in a potentially romantic relationship with a reformed assassin. Reformed is a strong word, Zareth replied. I prefer career pivot specialist. That's even better, Thomas said, and meant it. After all, he'd learned that sometimes the most important changes in life began with the simplest questions, like whether someone needed help, or wanted to share a meal, or was willing to risk everything to prevent unnecessary wars. The treaty key frequencies hummed quietly in his enhanced nervous system, no longer a source of confusion, but a reminder that he'd found his place in something larger than routine maintenance work. And if that place happened to include an alien